typically human anatomy being so complex, I think it, like as Leonardo da Vinci already identified, there's some like a real beauty in the human body, and everybody that looks at bone, musculoskeletal tissue, I think realizes that fascination as well. So looking now at concrete and seeing what my colleagues still do in the concrete field, I'm getting rather bored and thinking, I'm very privileged to be able to work on human musculoskeletal.
So it was a good move.
Very good move, yes.
Welcome to Inside the Shoulder. I'm Kenneth Cutbush. I'm here today with Professor Peter Pivonka. He is Professor and Chair of Biomechanics at the Queensland University of Technology, and he is also co-director of the ARC ITTC into Joint Biomechanics at the Queensland University of Technology. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for having me here.
Welcome. Now, you've had a big career, engineer to a biomechanist to now a shoulder collaborator. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are now? What was that journey like?
Well, my journey was I did a undergraduate in civil engineering in mechanics, and as we know, civil engineers are constructing bridges and high-rise buildings, and I got really interested in the material sides of things, and so I did a PhD in concrete failure and concrete structural failure. So we looked at earthquake engineering and how big bridge foundations would fail. And then I had the opportunity to do a postdoctoral fellowship in Australia, and my then supervisor was also like a hybrid between a civil engineer and medicine. And he said one day to me, "Well, what would you think if we go and do biomechanics in bone?" And I was first struck a bit. Sounded very, very strange, coming from a purely civil background. But then I thought, like, concrete is so well understood already. Like, how much more can we improve in concrete structures? We're doing this already very well. But looking into the biomechanics side and the bioengineering side, I felt there was so much more that could still be discovered in terms of new procedures. How can we make patients like hip implants better? And so I thought, well, that seems to be a logical decision to maybe like move into medical engineering and biomechanics.
So one day you were researching concrete, and the next day you were transitioning to be an expert in bone biomechanics.
Not like it was not quite working like that. Like at that stage, I was working at the University of Newcastle, and like he got a professorship at the University of Melbourne. Melbourne didn't have a bioengineering degree then. And so the challenge was building up an entire undergraduate degree in bioengineering. So I was able to start learning actually physiology, anatomy, from the start. And then once I knew enough anatomy and physiology, like Melbourne has the benefits. There's top institutes such as the WEHI, the St. Vincent's Institute, that are like the world leading institutes in bone biology. And so we started talking to these guys. What are the problems in bone? Like where does mechanics play into that? And through that link to really also talk to biologists, we realized there's a real gap between the engineering side and the mechanical people and the biology people. And I think that interaction between orthopaedic and mechanicist is exactly the same. So I think this is the nice challenge, to bridge these two fields.
How long had you been in Australia at that time when you made that change?
Like 2 years.
Right.
Years. I was
and from Wollongong to Melbourne?
Newcastle
Newcastle
to Melbourne.
Right.
Yeah.
And where were you born, Peter? Where did you come from?
I was born in Vienna and did all my studies in Vienna, did my PhD in Vienna, and it was like a huge opportunity. I had a Schrödinger fellowship, which allowed me to essentially perform research like 2 years at any designated institutions for that particular project that I applied for.
What's a Schrödinger fellowship?
Like it's basically anybody that completes their PhDs in Austria can apply for this. It's a postdoctoral fellowship, and you are essentially competing in all fields, not just in civil engineering. And there's maybe 5% of all completed PhD candidates would be awarded like such a fellowship.
So, what was that like going from Austria to
Australia.
Newcastle?
Yeah, that was a crazy journey to go there, and like the planning, obviously, what are you taking there, and originally, I obviously didn't plan to stay in Australia, but things, one thing came after the other, and I stayed. Like I think the opportunity that I had, to make this move from a civil engineer into biomedical engineering, I'm not sure that this is so easy in Austria, where everything runs very traditional, and very bureaucratic. So it's hard to bridge fields.
What was it like as a cultural shift coming to Australia? Is there one thing you remember about that cultural change, Austria to Australia?
Well, the Australians are significantly more laid back than the Austrians, so I think it was relatively easy to be integrated. People were super friendly, and you were very quickly in a new environment.
What got you into researching? What was the attraction to do a PhD?
Like originally, I completed my undergraduates and was about to. I actually wanted to plan after completing my master degree. I wanted to go for half a year traveling and explore the world. And the problem was I was very good in mechanics, and there was like one of the institutes, the boss there, like he called me in his office and said, we have a project, and we think that you would be the right person to do that project, and it's happening, within 2 months. So I said, well, but I'm trying to plan, go traveling 6 months. He said, just do do your PhD first and then travel later. That's what his suggestion was.
And did you ever travel later?
A little bit. Never the 6 months that I wanted to travel. That was.
What were you planning? Were you surfing or
surfing?
Bushwalking, or what were you planning on doing?
Mostly surfing.
Surfing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the attraction to Australia, was it surfing? That's what actually brought you here.
That was one of the attractions to Australia, yeah. And being far away from maybe family and being independent, potentially.
All right. As part of your role as a professor down at the Queensland University of Technology, you've supervised something like 25 PhD candidates. Tell me about that. What are the challenges with supervising PhD candidates?
I think the major challenge with supervising PhD candidates is that they come all with different skill sets when you start, and making sure that they are understanding what their roles are and how they are, what is expected of them in terms of project management, skill developments, and like the good students are a pleasure to supervise, because they are very independent. They know where to get knowledge from if they're stuck somewhere, but the challenging students can be hard to manage, because like you have to hold their hand very, very closely to get them over the finishing line.
You're now working with us in shoulder research. Is the humerus really more interesting than concrete?
I believe typically human anatomy being so complex, I think it, like as Leonardo da Vinci already identified, there's some like a real beauty in the human body, and everybody that looks at bone, musculoskeletal tissue, I think realizes that fascination as well. So looking now at concrete and seeing what my colleagues still do in the concrete field, I'm getting rather bored and thinking, I'm very privileged to be able to work on human musculoskeletal.
So it was a good move.
Very good move, yes.
Now, some of your researchers, the PhD candidates you're supervising, are looking at reverse shoulder replacements and fixation, and looking at it from a computational point of view. looking at this work, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about shoulder implant fixation? We're talking about joint replacements.
Yep. Like for me, like the positioning of the implant, you know, the like identifying the right position and taking into account also like distances of the muscles from the joint center. I feel that this is quite a under investigated area yet, and being taken into account for those shoulder replacements.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the reverse shoulder replacement is a particularly interesting area of research.
Yeah.
Peter, do you remember this? This was a couple of days ago, up on the stage at QUT at the ARC ITTC wind-up ceremonies we're having.
Yep.
You know, you've been working as co-director there. What have been some of the standout moments of this collaboration for you?
Well, I think the whole ARC training center, you know, was a unique opportunity to bring really even more disparate fields, not just orthopaedics and biomechanics together, but we had tissue engineers, like neurophysiology, like with Graham in there, and also like robotics as part of that. And I think like it becomes clear that, you know, having more multidisciplinary fields can you know bring very new viewpoints on how we treat, you know, shoulder surgery, rehabilitation, and identify, you know, how we can improve the patient's outcome in the shoulder.
Yeah. Now, YT gave an opening address at that meeting, and YT has been leading that collaboration.
Yep.
And it really struck me, you know, what YT was pointing out to all of us, and I think we sort of knew this, but $14.5 million co-invested grants, 44 research projects, 15 partners, 38 collaborators in terms of stakeholders, overall net present value, $63 million. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing for me to be part of, and it was something for me to see YT presenting those figures, and it really brought home the significance of that collaboration we had. And in terms of economic output, I had never really thought of it in those terms, but he quoted $95 million worth of economic output to the Queensland economy. In terms of return on investment, 699% return on investment, and a 130% increase in training output. So, pretty impressive numbers. Where do you fit into that? What's your take on that?
Well, I think that you know, one drawback of this type of grant schemes is that, you know, the investment of the Australian government is very finite, you know, over a 4 years period, and it's a shame that, you know, with these success numbers that you couldn't go back, you know, and say, you know, could we sort of like expand on that, you know, and then really try, you know, to basically have more commercialization in our endeavor as well. I think that maybe one of the, you know, major things in the grant was on training, and I think we could demonstrate that we achieved, you know, those outputs. You know, many PhD students trained, many postdocs trained. But I think, you know, for economic, you know, return of investments, it would have been nice, you know, if we could also push more startups potentially.
Yeah, and we had you know, some very important stakeholders: Stryker, Zimmer Biomet,
Yep.
AusBio. What were some of the others?
We had Logimass, Materialise. Yeah, and I think they all, you know, going strong, and we have continued, you know, interacting with Stryker and trying to push further projects off the ground, but not in such a large scale.
Because their contribution to that was incredibly important. We can't have an ITTC without industry involvement. So, yeah. And here we are, all of us down there in front of the QUT. You're right in the centre there in that photo.
Yeah. That was a great moment, and I think it was great that we had all the stakeholders again together and seeing over the various years our contributions. Yeah.
So it's been going for about 6 years now.
Yeah.
What was the highlight of that 6-year journey for you?
I think the highlight was, like for me, the like seeing some of the graduates, you know, like going, for example, one of our first graduate was Mr. Max Levile, you know, who went first from a PhD student, completing his PhD, then moving in a postdoctoral role, and now, you know, got a, you know, advanced Queensland fellowship, you know, and seeing the success with, you know, in a person's life essentially, and then some of the postdocs like Bart, moving from a postdoc role, then in a leadership role in the program one.
Yeah, we've had Max on in a previous episode.
Yeah,
and he's going on to great things.
yeah. I think he's very dedicated, and I think like that that provided for him the platform to actually develop his journey in biomechanics.
Now, as a professor, 150 publications, 155.
Yeah.
H-index of 44. What does that mean to you?
I think at some stage you like it doesn't become that important anymore. Like obviously writing paper for the paper writing sake, but if you have a question that you can address and you have a intellectual satisfaction of finding something that nobody else has thought about, I think that's more the reward in doing it.
And I think I was looking at your figures. Something like 47 million in total funding that you've been involved in terms of research grants. It was a pretty big number there.
Yeah, like not all the money obviously comes to me like a grant like that. You have as a CI a certain percentage, but still
we look at the RC TTC. There's all the people involved in that, and everyone's
that's right. So everybody gets a small chunk, and that's your budget with that you operate with.
Yeah. So where to next?
Where to next? Well, I'm currently working, with my team that we would like to, continue the success of the training center with more targeted projects in biomechanics, and then in the teaching space, continue to lead the biomechanics at QUT, and hopefully, pull motivated, talented, undergraduates in research programs.
Yeah.
That's for me my major goal.
It's all well and good talking about grants that you get, but Peter, what about the grants you didn't get? The pain. Like
obviously, like the grants that you get are typically far less than the ones that you've written and that you didn't get, and there's many of them where you thought it was a great grant, you put your heart into it, and you didn't get it.
What's an example of one?
I would say the biggest defeat that I've ever had was a future fellowship application. And you only have 2 chances to apply for the future fellowship. Like we're talking about around $1 million Australian dollar over 4 years, and they typically set up your, like scientific career. Like it was just before that you're sort of like a senior research fellow, and that would sort of like accelerate you into the associate professor realm. And in the first round, I was sort of I was basically under the 5% of grants that were sort of just falling under the funding line, and that was very hard to digest.
And what did it cost you? How long had you spent preparing that grant application?
Probably 2 months of my life, full time working.
Weekends.
Trying to pull a whole team together that it was a compelling story.
And did you go again? You said there were 2 chances.
That's right. And the second one, that was totally different. I think that's one maybe problem in the Australian grant system is that there is no memory in the system. So the panel changes year after year. So it's not like that you get a feedback and saying, it was a great grant. There were a few things that you could improve on. And then you go off, the investigator goes off, makes the improvements, reapplies, and then the panel might say, "Oh, fantastic! He did all what we recommended. That looks great. Now it's fundable." But in Australia, you have a different panel every year.
So it's a new application.
And
how'd you go?
Yeah, gone. Yeah, like not even within the 20%.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So another 2 months.
Maybe a bit less. Yeah.
Bit less.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it. You can never apply again.
No, that's it. Gone.
Yeah.
But again, there's many. For every door that closes, there's obviously new doors opening. So I think, in a way, I moved on to broaden also my expertise, as you were pointing out initially. Strongly focused on bone biology, bone biomechanics, and then going, more into the musculoskeletal and orthopaedic space. I think it was a great move.
Yeah. Out of those research projects, let's talk about your publications. Is there one publication that stands out?
I think maybe the most the publication that stands out for me is the one where one of the earliest publications in the bone biology biomechanics field that was laying a lot of groundwork for everything that came after, and that was in collaboration with the St. Vincent's Institute and their director for bone biology, like Jack Martin. And there was like an overseas collaborator, Professor Greg Mundy, who was leading a massive, like in Vanderbilt, a bone cancer research institute. And it was such a privilege to work with these guys together and propose, how we could frame that whole bone remodeling and how that would interact with mechanics.
What was the name of that publication?
It was Model Structure and Control of Basic Multicellular Units in Bone.
And where was it published?
In Bone, in the journal Bone, yeah, like the top 2 journal in Bone.
Yeah,
and it has like close to 400 publications, like citations, yeah.
I think 9,000 citations you've got now?
No, I think like around 6,000, yeah.
I think Google Scholar's a bit easier on that, it's only 9,000.
Yeah.
Talking about these setbacks, how has that developed your resilience?
Yeah, I think all the setbacks, it's always good, like they are reality checks, like if you, like what I tell all my postdoctoral fellows is, resilience in academia and many other branches, I think is a good skill to have, and I feel they make you stronger in terms of that you realize that try to have other avenues as well, so don't put put all your eggs in one basket and say I need to get this grant. With a success rate of let's talk about 12%, you would be crazy to think that you will get this grant, so you want to have a plan B, that you might actually have another option, if that grant doesn't come up. So for me that's an important lesson learned.
Yeah. How do you deal with the PhD candidate who's not making it? Because some of them get depressed, don't they? And
absolutely
get demoralized.
I think maybe that's a general thing in society, that maybe we are a society that is all about winners. And we never talk about the losers, and maybe if we wouldn't sort of separate these things so dramatically, then it might not be such a bad thing. Because let's say if a PhD student was not suitable for doing that work and that field, maybe he can discover, that he would be suitable for something else.
Yeah.
And one of the examples was that when I finished high school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to study, and I thought, architecture could be cool, and I studied 2 years architecture to discover, doing sketches and is not my thing. And then I was really happy to move into civil engineering and design structures. Mm-hmm. So in a way, that's a good thing to have, because
that ability to shift focus.
Yeah, and it's not like you could see it as a failure that I didn't complete a study, but maybe it's just a learning, I learned that this was not what I wanted.
So what advice would you have for someone who's looking at a career path in research? They've just finished their undergraduate degree.
I think, first of all, find a subject and topic that really interests you, because I believe without passion, I don't think you have the stamina to hold through a 3 years, PhD program. And once you identify that, find a good supervisor and team that can support you in that journey. And I think, you can obviously look at web pages, have a conversation with them, how they would run like a program like that. And then once you have a good feeling, then you can commit yourself.
Yep. Sounds like good advice. But before we close up, I'd like to ask you one final question, and that is, you were past president of the Australian-New Zealand Society of Biomechanics. Yes. What did that teach you? What was that like?
I think being the president of a society, meant that you had to really think in bigger terms. How does biomechanics, fit in the Australian basically ecosystem in terms of, both in teaching, research, and how can we promote, that field more in this context.
What were your responsibilities at the time?
Well, my responsibilities were, I tried with my connections to Europe. I basically linked the society with quite a few of my European colleagues. So we had like a special arrangement with the European Society for Biomechanics, the French Society for Biomechanics. We promoted more women in biomechanics. We had a special program for that, and then we also sort of supported early career researchers to play a bigger role in what is happening in the society. That it's not like top heavy, organized. Mm-hmm. I think that really helped. Like we have around 200 members, and yeah, it's a nice community.
What were the challenges?
Challenges is maybe, the Australia and New Zealand. So connecting with our New Zealand colleagues, they typically try to, do their own things and being integrative, that they are part of it. With, both with having, our biannual meetings, in New Zealand and in Australia.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, thanks for coming on. That was a terrific episode. Very interesting to hear your career and your path there and your journey. And I'm hoping that some young, enthusiastic, potential scientific researchers got something out of that. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Ken, for having me on the show.
You've been listening to Inside the Shoulder. I'm Kenneth Cutbush. I'm with Professor Peter Pivonka, Chair of Biomechanics at the Queensland University of Technology. If you've liked this episode, you'll find more of them on your favourite podcast platform, Apple and Spotify. And if you've liked this episode, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you for listening.